Act 1. The Warrior Without Anima, Section 1. Exile Begins. Beneath the looming presence of the bone-fanged totem, the council of the Silver Claw pack sat in an unbroken ring, their forms rigid as stone, their gazes colder than the desert wind. The embers of the great fire flickered in the heart of the gathering hall, casting long, wavering shadows that danced against the ancient wood. Smoke curled into the air, thick with the scent of burning herbs, their bitter aroma clinging to the tongue, a scent of judgment, of exile, of something far worse. Kaelan could feel it in the air, and the way the elders gripped their ceremonial staffs tighter than usual, and the way the warriors behind them averted their eyes, their ears flicking as though afraid to meet his gaze. Fear lay thick in there, silence heavier than any blade, more final than any wound. But no scent of fear was stronger than what simmered beneath Kaelan's own skin. It was not the fear of exile, not the fear of death. It was the fear of something inside him, growing, changing. He had known this day would come from the moment he staggered back from Blackstone Ridge, his body burning with unnatural heat, his veins pulsing with something that was not his own. He had told himself it would pass, that it was merely a wound. But wounds did not glow, wounds did not whisper. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before Elder Grether, oldest among them, wisest among them, finally spoke. He cannot stay. The words did not fall like a hammer strike, sudden and crushing. No, they came like the slow, inevitable grind of a blade against stone. A decision already made before it had been spoken. Kaelan's claws curled into his palms, his grip tight enough to draw blood. A low murmur rippled through the gathered wolves, some relieved, others uneasy, but none speaking in his defense. Not even those who had once called him brother. This is madness. His voice came low and sharp, a growl simmering beneath his words. His tail bristled, his ears flattening. I fought for this pack. I bled for this pack. And now you cast me out. No answer. Only the quiet crackling of the fire, reflected in the hardened stares of the warriors who had once fought beside him. Grether's gaze held no anger, no cruelty, only the weight of a burden too great to ignore. You carry something unknown. His voice was calm, like the final breath before the plunge of a dagger. We do not know what it will become. Kaelan knew this was not just about him. If he stayed, if whatever had seeped into his blood spread, what then? His tail lashed once before stilling. He exhaled slowly, his fingers twitching as his gaze flickered down to his left arm. Beneath his fur, the sickly green glow pulsed faintly, threading through his veins like roots of something not meant to exist in this world. The mark of corruption. At first, he had believed it would fade. He had ignored the strange hum in his bones, the way the world had begun to sound. Different, the whispers in the night that were not his own, but the dreams had worsened. Visions of towering figures cloaked in metal, their eyes burning with cold, unfeeling light. Voices that spoke in a language his soul recognized, though his mind could not comprehend. And with every passing day, his senses had sharpened, shifting, warping. He could hear the land in ways no wolven should, and the pack had noticed. They had whispered behind his back, their unease festering like rot. Warriors flinched when they stood to close. Pups were pulled away before their curious eyes could linger on him too long. He had tried to pretend, to act as though nothing had changed, but deep down he had known. And now, standing before his people, Kaelan felt the fire inside him war against the quiet, creeping dread. "You fear what you do not understand," he said, his voice lower now, but no less sharp. Grether's ears flattened slightly, yet he did not deny it. "Yes." The word struck like a death blow, "and that is why you must go." A sharp intake of breath from one of the younger warriors, the fire crackled. Somewhere beyond the gathering hall, a lone howl rose in the distance, carried by the night wind. Kaelan's heart pounded against his ribs, steady and unyielding. This was not just exile, this was a death sentence. A woven without a pack was nothing. No name, no home, no purpose. A lone warrior was not a predator, he was prey. His fingers twitched at his sides, his instincts screamed at him to fight. He could demand trial by combat, challenge Grether, challenge any elder who stood against him, prove his strength. But what if they were right? What if this mark was not just an affliction but a curse? What if he was no longer himself? His claws clenched tighter, his breath steadied, though his chest felt hollow. Grether's final words seal the verdict. By dawn you must leave the pack. The weight of them was heavier than any wound, any battle scar, any loss he had ever endured. Kaelan stood for a long time, staring into the embers of the fire. Once, its warmth had guided him, a beacon in the cold of night. Now, it was just another thing he would never call his own again. Without another word, he turned and walked into the darkness, and the warmth of the fire never reached him again. Section 2. The Road to the Unknown. The night had not yet faded when Kaelan left. No words, no farewells, only silence and the slow, deliberate sound of his own footsteps, softened by the endless tide of shifting sand. The air was cold and naturally so, a chill that did not belong in the red sands, seeping into his fur, crawling into his bones like an unseen presence watching, waiting. The desert was never truly quiet. There was always the whisper of the wind, the distant chitter of unseen things slithering beneath the dunes, the distant howl of predators staking their claim to the night. But tonight the silence was absolute. Kaelan felt it pressing in on him. Like the weight of an unseen predator, he walked on, never looking back. The obsidian tip of his spear glinted, and the faint light slung across his back like a burden that had suddenly grown heavier. The ochre sigil streaked across his fur, once a mark of pride, now clung to him like the remnants of a past that no longer belonged to him. He was no longer Silverclaw, no longer anything. A woven without a pack was not a warrior. A woven without a pack was nothing. The red sands stretched before him, vast and merciless, shifting under the pale light of the moon. The dunes rolled endlessly like waves upon a frozen sea, their crests whispering secrets as the wind wove through them. Beyond them, jagged cliffs tore at the sky, blackened stone rising like the broken ribs of some long-dead beast. To the east, Blackstone Ridge loomed, and the distance, its shadow stretching long and foreboding across the desert. Behind him lay the only home he had ever known. Before him, nothing. He did not stop. He moved like a ghost, his steps sure and steady, his breath slow and measured. Every step was a choice. Every step was a rejection of the past. But the red sands were cruel to those who traveled alone. The desert swallowed the weak, it burned flesh by day, froze bones by night. It did not care for warriors, for outcasts, for the foolish who thought they could defy it. It simply took and took and took. Kaelan felt the weight of it with every mile he put behind him, the shifting ground beneath his paws, the growing ache in his limbs, the sting of sand whipping against his face as the wind began to rise. His breathing grew heavier, but he did not stop. He could not, because the burning had not stopped. The mark on his arm pulsed beneath the wrappings, an unnatural heat that did not fade, did not weaken. It crawled through his veins, sinking deeper into his flesh, into his bones. It did not wound like a blade. It did not break like a fractured limb. It was something else entirely, something wrong. And then came the whispers, soft at first, just the faintest scratch at the edges of his thoughts, like wind scraping against stone. Then stronger a murmur beneath his skull, shifting, twisting, an intrusion that was not his own. Not words, not yet, but something watching, something waiting. Kaelan's ears flattened, a growl rising low in his throat. No. The word was sharp, defiant, a snarl that echoed through the empty dunes. His grip tightened around his spear claws, digging into the wood, grounding himself in something real. The cold steel, the solid weight in his hands. Not the thing inside him, not whatever sickness had buried itself beneath his skin. His breath came sharp and slow, his heart pounding as he forced himself to focus. The desert, the wind, the warmth of his own breath in the frigid air. The whispers did not retreat, but they did not grow louder. Not yet. Kaelan exhaled, steadying. His pulse, his claws flexed, then released. The heat in his arm did not fade, but he forced himself to push forward one step, then another. Somewhere in this world there were answers. Someone, something, knew what this was, knew how to tear it from him, how to rid him of this curse before it was too late. And if there was no way to rid himself of it, then he would not let himself become the thing that had lurked in the ruins of Blackstone Ridge. He would not let himself be consumed by whatever had infected him. He would die before that happened. The wind howled, rolling across the dunes like a living thing. The sky overhead was endless, vast and black. The stars watching in silent indifference. A storm loomed in the distance, a dark mass curling at the edges of the horizon, its shape shifting like a living beast. The air crackled with the promise of something coming, something that had not yet arrived but was inevitable all the same. Kaelan felt it in his bones. The world was changing. The Wildstone realms were not what he had always believed them to be. He had been born into the laws of the hunt, into a world of stone and claw, of honor and instinct. But there had been things buried beneath the sands that no warrior had ever spoken of. There had been whispers of a past that did not belong to them. Now that past had found him, and he was walking straight into its jaws. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, he was already far beyond the reach of the Silver Claw. The land before him was unknown, unfamiliar, untamed, and still he did not stop, not until the answers found him, or until he no longer had the strength to search. Section 3. The Assassin's Mission. Nikira Vales moved through Velvet Thorn as though she were part of its breath unseen yet ever-present. An echo in the city's whispers, a ghost that lingered between silk and steel. The city sprawled beneath the moonlight, its streets slick with lantern glow and damp with the scent of wine, perfume, and forgotten sins. A kingdom of shadowed indulgence, Velvet Thorn was more than its opulent facades and perfumed halls. It was a creature of hunger, devouring those too foolish to understand its nature. Here, pleasure and death shared the same bed. And Nikira was one of its unseen rulers. She did not wear a crown, nor did she wield a throne. She was the knife in the dark, the whisper before the scream, the last breath exhaled against a silk veil. She had been trained in the hidden corridors of power, molded by the Nightshade Syndicate into something more than an assassin, more than a courtesan, more than a shadow. She was the phantom no one saw coming. In the Velvet Thorn, she played the role of a courtesan well, cloaked in the finest silks, adorned in jewels that masked the blades hidden beneath her touch. She was a vision of delicate beauty. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, held the weight of mysteries none dared to ask about. Those who sought her company believed they held power over her, mistaking the tilt of her chin and the softness of her voice for submission. But they were always wrong. Tonight, she did not wear the mask of seduction. Tonight, she was the predator. Her target, Warlord Castor, a beast of muscle and cruelty who had carved his name into the flesh of the Warlord's reckoning, taking his victories through blood and bone. He was a warlord of brutal excess, a creature of appetite who feasted upon power as though it could never be taken from him. She had studied him, watching from the shadows, reading his every move, his arrogance, his hunger, his weakness. He believed himself untouchable, and tonight she would remind him that no beast is beyond the reach of the blade. The wind wove through the corridors of his estate, carrying the scent of spiced wine, smoldering resin, and charred meat. The great hall below swelled with revelry, warriors feasting in celebration, their roars of laughter thick with mead and indulgence. The heavy scent of their pleasures filled the air, burnt fat from roasted beasts, the musk of bodies entangled in excess, the cloying perfume of incense met to cover the stench of blood and sweat. They did not know that their leader would not live to see dawn. Nikira moved as if she had been woven from the wind itself, slipping through the balcony window, her feet touching the cold marble without a sound. The scent of him lingered here, Castor, a creature who devoured, who consumed, who took without regret. His chambers reflected his nature vast, draped in heavy crimson silks, tapestries depicting battles won, enemies crushed, cities razed. A golden goblet sat overturned on a polished table, staining the fine silk with its thick contents, its taste no doubt rich with the blood of those he had stolen it from. Everything in this place was a monument to his victories, but victories meant nothing to the dead. Nikira's fingers curled around the hilts of her twin daggers. The blades were coated in nightshade kiss, a venom designed to kill before a scream could escape the throat. She had ended warlords with this poison, lords of crime who believed they were untouchable, kings who had ruled for decades, cut down in seconds. Castor would be no different. She moved forward, then stopped. The air shifted. The warmth of the candle light did not touch her skin. The soft flickering of the flames no longer danced against the walls. The scent of wine soured, curdling into something metallic, the distant revelry below muffled, as if swallowed by something unseen. A whisper of instinct curled along her spine. And then he moved. Gaster was standing, not waking, not breathing, standing. The warlord loomed in the dim light, his massive form unnaturally still, unnaturally rigid. His skin, once bronze from battle, was ashen, stretched tight, his veins dark against the pale flesh. His lips were slightly parted as if caught mid-breath, except he did not breathe. Nikira had seen death. She had dealt death. She knew the weight of the final breath, the way a body collapsed when its soul departed. But this was not death, his eyes gods, his eyes, clouded, gray, and empty. But they saw her. Something inside them saw her. She did not hesitate. The dagger left her grip in a perfect arc, its venom-laced edge slicing the air, aimed for the throat. A perfect strike, a killing blow. And then nothing. The flesh shifted, not like muscle, not like skin, but like something else entirely, something not meant to move as flesh should. It twisted, contorted, bending like metal struck against an anvil, like the warlord's body was nothing but a vessel reshaping itself in response. The dagger clattered to the floor, useless, the poison, lethal in even the smallest trace, had done nothing. Nikira did not breathe. Then it spoke, but it was not his voice, it was many voices, layered, grinding against one another like stone scraping steel. A chorus of something ancient and fractured, speaking through a vessel that no longer belonged to itself. You are not part of the calculation. The air collapsed. The room darkened not like the dimming of candlelight, but as if something had swallowed the very concept of light. The warmth of velvet thorn was gone. The sound of revelry below was gone. The walls, were they closer? Were they bending inward? The air pressed against her, thick, suffocating, crushing. The scent of wine had rotted into something acrid, something burning, something not of this world. Nikira vanished before she even registered the movement. Her body reacted before her mind could comprehend the horror. Instinct took over, her limbs moving with a speed she did not custom, leaping from the balcony, slipping through the city like wind and shadow. She had never fled from a target before, but this was not a target. Her breath burned in her lungs, her pulse hammering against her ribs, but she did not stop. She could still feel it, stretching toward her, not with hands, but with something else, something not meant to be here. She did not stop running. Not until she reached the farthest edge of velvet thorn, not until the cold night air pressed against her skin, her dagger trembling in her grasp, not until she understood the truth. Castor had never been alive, and whatever had worn his face was not of this world. Section 4. The Bandit Ambush. The road had long since crumbled beneath time's relentless hand. Once, it might have been part of an empire-paved stone, well worn by traders and warriors alike, a path carved through the Wildstone realms that led to conquest or ruin. Now it was a memory of a road, fractured and broken, its stones sunken into the earth, half swallowed by the creeping roots of the land reclaiming what had been stolen. Dust layered everything, fine and pale as bone ash, shifting in the wine like restless spirits whispering of things long buried. For 3 days, Kaelan had followed it, moving north toward lands unknown, where the scent of sand gave way to the stinging bite of distant storm winds, the cold creeping into his bones like an omen. The landscape had changed with each mile. The red sands had long since faded behind him, replaced by the ashen lowlands, a wasteland of jagged rock formations and twisted remnants of petrified trees, their skeletal limbs reaching toward the sky as if in silent mourning. The land was old here, haunted by memories it had not yet forgotten. The wilds were never truly silent. The wind howled through the broken cliffs, carrying with it the distant calls of unseen creatures, predators that stalked the shadows between the ruins, their eyes watching from the dark. The sky, once a molten tapestry of reds and golds, had dulled to a steel gray, the clouds pregnant with the promise of a storm that never seemed to come. The scent of rain lingered but never fell. Kaelan had seen no signs of life, no travelers, no merchants, no scattered encampments that spoke of civilization, until they came. The first sound was soft, a boot shifting against loose stone. The second was sharper, the scrape of metal against leather, the unmistakable whisper of blades being drawn. Kaelan did not lift his head, but his ears flicked toward the noise, his grip tightening around the shaft of his spear. Bandits. They emerged from the broken rocks like starving wolves. 5 of them, each one lean, scarred by past fights, their fur matted with dust and grime, their eyes glinting with the sharp hunger of those who survived by taking from others. They moved with the confidence of those who had done this before, their bodies already falling into practiced positions, a circle, cutting off escape routes, weapons at the ready. Their armor was patchwork, scavenged from the dead, their weapons a mismatched collection of rusted steel and stone blades. But they had numbers, and they had certainty. They thought they had already won. The leader stepped forward, his form hulking but gaunt, his face marred by an old wound that had stolen his right eye. A rusted sword hung loosely in his grip, casual, but Kaelan could see the readiness in his stance. A voice slick with arrogance slithered through the air. "You lost, pup?" Kaelan did not answer. The leader's single eye flicked to the spear strapped across Kaelan's back. Obsessed with the weapon, greedy, a scavenger looking at something he could pry from the hands of the dead. "Look at that spear, boys. That looks valuable." The others grinned, a ripple of amusement passing between them. Kaelan felt a shift in the air, the moment before violence, the heartbeat of stillness before the strike. The leader lifted a hand, a silent command. To go, they lunged. Kaelan moved faster. The first bandit barely had time to register what had happened before the obsidian tip of Kaelan's spear punched clean through his chest, a spray of blood catching the dim light before he crumpled into the dirt. The second and third hesitated, a mistake. Kaelan snarled, twisting into motion, his body moving with the raw efficiency of a hunter. His instincts ruled him faster than thought, faster than doubt. He pivoted, the spear whistling through the air as he slammed the shaft into the side of the next bandit's skull, the crunch of bone shattering the night. The man crumpled before he could even cry out. The third scrambled backward, panicked, his knife raised in defense, too slow. Kaelan stepped forward, his foot driving into the bandit's knee, shattering it. and as the man fell screaming, the spear found his throat. The last two were already moving, retreating, cowards realizing too late that they had miscalculated. And then the mark on Kaelan's arm burned. It was no longer pain. It was awakening. The world around him cracked. The air grew heavy, humming with something primal, something alive, something waiting. His pulse thundered in his ears, his breath sharp, his body no longer just flesh and bone, it was something more. Lightning danced at his fingertips. The power surged through him, coiling beneath his skin like a living thing. The ground beneath his feet shuddered, the scent of ozone burning through the cold air. The clouds above churned, flickering with veins of light, responding to him. For the first time since Blackstone Ridge, the storm did not resist him. For the first time it obeyed. Kaelan let it. The storm answered. The final two bandits turned to flee, their weapons forgotten, terror etched across their faces. Kaelan lifted his hand, the storm followed. The air ignited with blinding white-blue light, the bolt of raw energy tearing through the night, striking down both men before they could take another step. Their bodies convulsed, smoking, the scent of charred fur and burned flesh filling the air, and then silence. The storm faded, retreating as quickly as it had come. The only sound was the crackling embers of the scorched ground, the faint echo of thunder still rolling across the distant sky. Kaelan stood amidst the carnage, his breath steady, his hands still crackling with residual energy, the embers of the storm dancing at his fingertips. The mark on his arm pulsed, but it did not burn. For the first time since the corruption had taken root, it had listened to him, it had become part of him. The realization settled deep in his chest, curling like smoke. Was it power, or was it something else? He did not know. The bodies at his feet did not care. Kaelan exhaled, rolling his shoulders, shaking off the last of the storm's energy. He stepped over the corpses, barely sparing them a glance. He had no need to search them. They had nothing worth taking. The only thing that mattered now was forward. The broken road still stretched before him. The Wildstone realms had given him no answers, so he would find them himself.